I want to talk a little bit about the structure of county government. Counties are in the state of Montana, a majority of our counties are operating with the elected county officials form of government. And the elected county officials form, ECOF, is very similar, it uses the same structure in the state statute in the MCA as the commission form. And in 1976, every county in the state of Montana was required to ask of their voters, do you want to stay with your existing form of government or adopt an alternative? And the existing form of government was, at that time, the elected county officials form. And they would have to ask the voters, and the voters had to approve a shift to some other form of government, the most common being the commission form of government. That looks the same, operates the same, smells the same. They're just two different structures in the law and in the Constitution. All but the two consolidated city-county governments, which would be Butte, Silver Bow, and Anaconda Deer Lodge, operate within this structure. They both look very similar, but they're just named two different things, and the voters need to adopt this one, and this was the existing one. Okay, so with that said, hopefully that wasn't too confusing. With that said, I want to talk about how this looks relative to the branches of government. It's easy when you look at municipalities to see how those branches of government look, or what they look like. So in municipalities, we have the executive branch, which is often what we'll call the mayor, and the legislative branch, which we'll call the council or commission. And then this would be the judicial branch down here, which would be your district court. Now, if you had the commission executive form of government, and that's how Anaconda Deer Lodge and Butte Silver Bow operate with the commission executive form of government, where they have an elected commission, which is the legislative branch. They have an elected chief executive that carries out the policies and ordinances that are adopted by the commission. So it's, think governor, legislature, president, Congress, mayor, council. So that's how the two consolidated governments work. But as I said, all of the other counties operate with these two, either this one or this structure of government, the commission form. And when you look at the commission form, there is no kind of executive branch that's highlighted, like you would see with the commission manager form of government, where you have an elected commission and they hire the manager, similar to a school board superintendent, or the commission presiding officer, where you have an elected commission and that commission then elects one of their members of the commission to be their presiding officer or the executive. Right? So each of these structures of government, forms of government, identify the executive branch of government. When you look at the commission form, that begs the question, who operates as the executive? So what makes counties unique is that the county commission operates as both the legislature or the legislative branch and the executive branch in one governing body. So they're responsible for passing policies and ordinances and facilitating the broader conversation about governance in that county. They make their decisions, and then they're also, in the legislative branch, or using that hat, if you will, the legislative hat. And then once it's adopted, they're also responsible for ensuring that that policy or ordinance is enforced. So they're wearing both of those hats or responsibilities as the legislative branch and the executive branch rolled into one governing body. So they're like the mayor and the council in one group. So it's not uncommon for them to have a meeting that will talk about a particular policy, and they may have then outside of that meeting talk about how we're going to implement that policy. They're not crafting policy, but they're thinking about execution of policy. This is where they oversee and manage all the department heads, like a mayor would, but it's also the legislative branch, which then creates more opportunity for county commissions, because they're having to deal as a board, as a board of the commission, the administration and supervision of department heads, which will require at times for them to close open meetings and have their meetings closed to protect the right of the privacy of the individual that they're engaging with in that supervision and evaluation of their performance, which is an interesting balance that we can talk about in another video that we'll get to, talking about the role of the open meeting law and the citizens' right to privacy and how we balance those two expectations. But suffice it to say, in this conversation, in the case of county commissions, they're operating as both those executive and legislative branches in one governing body, and that's why you'll see them wearing two different hats, if you will, making the policy and responsible for carrying out the policy, and why you'll see in county government the closing of public meetings to talk about personnel issues more frequently than you will with municipalities, because there's this separation of powers here. And typically, the mayor can deal with the implementation and management of those, the staff of the city, without having to involve the city council in that. And that's why typically there is less need for closing meetings and having executive sessions with cities, which is different than counties. So I hope that clarifies some things for you. So we'll talk about the balance of the public's right to know and the individual's right to privacy in a future video. Thanks.